Good evening. This is Debra B. Wilson. It is the 4th of September 2017. The time is 1900 hours and 44 minutes, and that's GMT minus 6, and I am in the middle, the exact middle of Canada. That's Winnipeg. This evening's podcast is best described as civilians, observations of civilians, observation of state constructed security models, well, actually the people that implement and quote unquote run the models. So today, I was not aware of it, and that's unfortunate. I try to keep abreast of such things, but anyway, today out of the UK, I was via the Twitter feed of Terrorism Police UK, following some of the utterances coming out of the Police Superintendents Association of England and Wales conference. I will remind you again that these are observations in my opinion. And I was looking at the language. I was not only reading the tweets in regards to the subject matter, I was paying attention to the language being used. And then I started thinking about how I read the information as a African American woman who's also Muslim and a feminist. And then I was thinking about the amount of time I've spent in the UK looking from the bottom up at the UK's security models. And from a bottom up perspective is the civilian perspective, so the lived experiences. So then I started thinking about some of the times that, I'm going to just be blunt. So I was questioned a lot about my activism in the UK at Heathrow Airport. And I was questioned by the state, the government. And the language, it went on for several years. My language as a civilian, as an academic, as an activist was different than the state, the people involved in the state security models. It went on for some time, over a swapping period of time. But one of the interesting things that happened was I certainly learned their language and their perspective. I wouldn't say I always agreed on their perspective, but I began to understand that there was indeed a different perspective. So in the Twitter feed from Terrorism Police UK, Prevent was mentioned. And that Prevent, and I will include the link to all these things, that terrorism has been criticized. I know firsthand that Prevent has been criticized because I'm one of the people that criticize it, and there are other civilians and some organizations that have criticized Prevent. So I certainly understand why I don't care for Prevent, but then my observations about Prevent lead me to ask the following questions. And I'm sorry this is a bit of a muddle, but I want it to be a bit of a muddle because I've struggled with this, looking at a security model the way I experience it from a civilian perspective, but also because of the course of my activism, I did spend a fair amount of time hearing the perspective that the state had on the work I was doing. So when I look at Prevent, and one of the things that Prevent, and forgive me if I'm using the wrong language, Prevent is asking certain sectors in society, such as schools and the health sector, to also be mindful if they see someone being quote unquote radicalized. I think some people find that problematic. Your schools, your medical care, those should be off limits. But in reality, you certainly should be afforded freedom of education and interpretation. I'm thinking at the university level, and you certainly should be afforded privacy in your medical treatment. But the state has already, in countries like the UK and in countries like Canada and in countries like Israel, already taken primacy over that relationship you have with your healthcare provider or with a school in certain circumstances. So before I started this rather muddled, admittedly muddled podcast, I went on the Child Protective Service site in the UK, England and Wales. So if you take a child to the hospital, to the doctors for care, you've taken that child to the doctors for care as a private citizen. You expect some privacy as that family. But if the doctor believes that the child has been abused or anticipates based on the observed relationship between the child and the parent, abuse, doctors, medical professionals are expected to reach out to the state. If, for example, a school child shows up every day with something that's concerning to the school, the child doesn't appear to be eating on a regular basis, the child sleeps in class, the expectation is the school will step over that relationship between child and parent and go to the state. So then I looked at the Child Protective Services site and I thought, so we expect that, we want that. And in addition to that, if I, as an adult woman, I'm 60 years old. So if my husband brings me into to casualty for the fifth time in 5 months with the same type of bruises, and I've again fell down a flight of stairs, but the bruises don't match up with that, and again it's the fifth time in 5 months. The state, the hospital can reach out and say, we think this might be a battered woman. So then what's the difference? And I'm asking this as a person that has finds prevent problematic. One of the things that is different is that Child Protective Services looking for the well-being of a battered woman or a battered person. It's just it. It's the well-being of that person, the welfare of the person. The way prevent is, the branding around prevent is to give the state an additional tool, to give something to the state. I don't mean to say this is simplistic, but the same rights that already exist for the state to step into your education, childcare, my relationship with my mythical husband, because they believe my welfare is at stake. But prevent has stepped in and constructed itself in such a way to step over the primacy of some intimate, close, familial relationships. But in the case of prevent, it's to give the state an extra tool. I would argue, and I'm sorry that this is so muddled, that not only looking after the welfare of a child or a person, a spouse, be it male or female, is not only for the welfare of that individual, but it's for the greater good of the state. It is for the benefit of the state. But we conceptualize those models, the caring models, is that you care. Prevent is run as a security model. So you wouldn't expect, and also it might seem disingenuous if the state came back and said, we're doing this because we care for you, we want your well-being. And in the cases the state says that, we actually don't believe it. So what's the disconnect? What is the disconnect? When Child Protective Services already has the ability to step into your child's education, your child's health care, to say something is wrong. The state needs to step in here. So I'm asking a theoretical question, again, as a person that finds prevent problematic. I think one of the major problems is because the construct, and this is wow, this isn't new. The concept and the belief that prevent is targeted toward one group that already feels some in that group collectively already under hyper microscope. The other issue might be, and I believe, is that the people who are implementing the model, what is their training? What is the lens they're looking to judge who is a threat and why they're a threat? We have relative confidence in the fact that a woman goes into the hospital, nurses and doctors look at her, the fact she's been here for the fifth month in a row with the same suspicious bruising that don't actually sync up with this. She fell down a flight of stairs yet again, the fifth month in a row. So what's missing in that trust, the model of the within prevent? Some of it I think is language, the language that the state uses, tools, strategy, but that's the state. It's not a doctor. It's not the caring industry sector. It's not a social worker. So some of that is innate to the to the industry. And also, for me, I would find it patronizing and disingenuous if policing models, counterterrorism models started using more cuddly words, but in essence, who and what they are is what they are. And in reality, do you want a cuddly policing service? You want a respectful one, a lawful one with a great deal of oversight, but do you really want cuddly? I don't think I do. So this podcast, it certainly isn't to present any answers. They're questions. But when I look at what prevent is supposed to do, I often think you've already got laws to make sure children aren't abused. And so this radicalization that I call grooming, if a child's being encouraged to engage in hateful thought, and of course, who's defining what's hateful thought? But if we go with an agreed upon construct of what hateful thought is, othering, committing violence against another, that's child abuse. So the UK has laws for that. So, and then if the UK, which the UK already has laws for that, then what's the disconnect? Why? Is it because the Child Protective Services, we don't tend to associate them with one group? But that's not always been the case. Some African, some communities of African descent have certainly been felt picked on by Child Protective Services. Some poor families have felt picked on by Child Protective Services. So, but yet and still, most people don't want to dismantle Child Protective Services, or the fact that the doctors are on the lookout for women who might be, and men, people who might be victims of violence in an intimate relationship, children that might be victims of violence. We allow the state to step in, even if we're going to the doctor or school. Now, the additional aspect of prevent that is not in the service, the caring industries, is the component of it. The university's looking at your research, your school, your work, what you're looking at, why you're looking at it, and your take on it. I get it. I research extremism and counterterrorism all day long, every day. And I wonder, and I get concerned. When I was in the UK, I was doing it. And I did get questioned. When I was in Israel recently, I spent all my days researching extremism. I was concerned. And I did have a wee bit of a talk with Israeli security at one point as I was leaving the country. And now in Canada. And I've had a talk here as well. This is a muddled podcast because I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to wrap my head around myself why I find prevent problematic when in the case of the UK, some of the uh, some of the powers the state have been given and prevent already existed and available to the state, but the word how we name the problem, child abuse for child protective services, radicalization. Radicalization, we typically think of Muslims. Well, we do. Is that part of it because of the wording? I'm not judging, I'm asking. Is that part of it because of the wording? And radicalization, anybody can be radicalized, but we think of, Muslims. And we think if we don't think it's true, we certainly think that many of us think that's who we're pointing to, or the direction we're being pointed. So muddled podcast, but it's what I'm trying to work through myself on an individual level. The questions that I would like to ask the state, and then there are questions I'm asking myself as an academic. Why the state created Prevent when some of its abilities to step into the private lives of the citizens with good cause already exist. Child protective services, other things that already exist. So why Prevent? And then on the other side, why are we angry about Prevent? Is it the wording? Not judging. I'm asking the academic question. Is it the wording? Is it the fact that it appears to be tailored and with a lens on a specific grouping of communities? This is Debra V. Wilson. This is probably a good time and a good reason why you don't need to like or dislike my videos. And indeed, this one you won't be able to because this one's muddled. But I want to keep it muddled because that's exactly the space I'm in at the moment. This is Debra V. Wilson, and I am in Canada. Thank you.